beautiful words that I love so much, Happy Sabbath. I could not always say those words, but I say it now with so much passion, so much excitement, because, yes, it's good. And I'll tell you, I finally got it right. I finally got it right. For 56 years, my mind was blinded to the truth. The devil kept me blinded to this wonderful message, this truth. But now the word's out. The word's out. I know the truth, and he done messed up. But I'm telling everybody, amen. My goal is everybody that I see, I'm going to tell them about this wonderful truth that I have now. Praise his name. I was born to a Christian mom and dad. When I was born, my parents were believers. And I was born on a Sunday morning. And they tell me that on Wednesday evening that they had me in church, Wednesday evening. Now, I don't remember that, of course. I was only 4 days old, but they tell me that. But I do remember growing up in church, that I can count on one hand how many times I've ever missed going to church growing up in my life. So I grew up with a family that loved the Lord. They were not Sabbath keepers. We were Baptists. But that's all that I knew growing up. But we went to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday evening, Wednesday night. I grew up in church. They dedicated me to the Lord. And I knew at an early age that God had his hand on my life. When I was 9 years old, I repented. I received the message. I repented. I was baptized, and I received him as my Lord. And I knew at 9 years old that God had called me to be a pastor. I didn't know the word pastor at that time was the associated word, but as I look back, I know that I was to be a pastor at 9 years old because the hand of God was on my heart. And I grew up knowing that. And so I have a wonderful heritage of Christian background. I just didn't have this truth about the Sabbath. I just didn't have it. And so when I was 20 years old, I answered that call, and I went to college and Bible college, and then I finally made it through seminary and so forth and got a degree and all of that, started pastoring a church, and I've been pastoring now for 35 years. But I pastored a Sunday church or Sunday churches for 35 years, and I preached the truth of what I knew to be the truth all of that time. And we decided that God was leading us to begin a Christian school. And so we started a Christian school in Huntsville 14 years ago. And the beautiful thing is, because Huntsville has such an impact with Adventists there because of Oakwood and an Adventist population there is pretty heavy, several of the Adventist families have chosen to put their children in our school. Now I'm telling you that God planted them there for me because I didn't know the message. And so these children came to my school. And for all of these years, I kind of kept a watchful eye on these families and these children. And I was wondering, well, why would anybody want to waste a good Saturday going to church? And so I kind of had that looking down on you type of an attitude. I'm thinking, why don't you just not go on Saturday, because that's the day of football game and fishing and all of that. But why don't you just come to our church on Sunday and let's just do it right? That was kind of my attitude. But there were some of these students that had the calling on their heart that they would come to my office and they would say, Pastor Reggie, could I talk to you for a minute? And I would say, sure, because my door was always open. And there was this one young lady a few years ago came in and she began telling me about the Sabbath message. And I was listening to her, very politely listening, but I didn't open my heart to it. After all, I had a PhD, you know, and I was not going to be listening to a 10th grade girl tell me about doctrinal things. But I was polite as a pastor. So we sat there and we talked and so forth. We didn't argue. I just listened to her, and all along thinking, yeah, that's right. She'll learn one day. But I kept looking at the families. And you know what I discovered? That those Adventist families that God planted into our school, those Adventist families, they loved on me, they cared for me, they gently guided me, they just consistently lived and walked out their faith. And I remember one time we had a basketball game on a Friday evening. We didn't have a charge of the schedule, and the game happened to be on a Friday evening. And so one of our very best players was an Adventist student, and his dad came, and we had it was a Friday afternoon game, and I noticed that right about 30, 45 minutes before sundown, right in the middle of the game, the dad come and he took his children and they left. Yeah. And I took notice of that. I think, why? Now, I know why he's doing that, because they're going to church. But the thing I'm trying to say is these families was consistent. They loved their God. They believed their message, and they walked in truth, and they did it with love. And then one day, this very man who I was telling you that took his children out of the game, he came to me one day and he said, Pastor Reggie, his name is Guy Jusang, for those of you that would know him. He said, Pastor Reggie, he said, you know, you and I, we have a great relationship, and his children have been in our school 5 or 6 years. And I said, sure. He said, can I talk to you for a moment? I said, sure, come on in. And he said, you know, Pastor, he said, I've got the book that I would like for you to read. He said, now, you know, we've read the book. In my family, we believe the things that are in this book, but, you know, we might have it wrong. We might be deceived on something here. Now, buddy, he was setting me up here. Setting me up. And he said to me, he said, you know, Pastor, he said, I really appreciate you. You've got a PhD in theology and all that. He said, do you mind reading this book here? And it was the 10 Commandments, twice removed. He said, would you just read the book, and at the end of the book, just tell me what you think about it, and if there's anything wrong with the book, please love me enough to come and tell me so that I can get it right. And boy, he was really stroking that ego thing. And I said, well, sure, brother, I'll be glad to read that book. And all along I'm thinking, here's my chance. I'm going to get it straight with these folks. So I took the book, and I read it. I read through this book the first time, and I've got to tell you something. It literally shocked me what I read. I mean to tell you, it shocked me. Even though I had a PhD, I'd never learned this before. And I said, well, you know, there's got to be more to this. Maybe I just read it too quickly. And so I decided that I would read the book again. So I read every page. And there it begins sinking in, and I begin thinking, you don't think that maybe I've had it wrong all this time? And I begin learning about Constantine and all the stuff that happened there in the Catholic Church and how that we begin following after that tradition. And then I began thinking, well, maybe I have had it wrong. Let me read it a third time. And so I read it 3 times. And at the end of the third time, I was so stirred in my heart, I said, I've got to let my wife read this book. And so I took it home, and I had not told her that I had read the book. She didn't know the history that you just now know. I just handed her the book, and I said, honey, would you read this book? And just at the end of it, just tell me what you think about it. That's all I said. Just tell me what you think about it. She said, sure. And so she read the book. She read it like one night. It was only 128 pages. She just read the book, and I was there. I remember the very moment that she finished the last page, because I was waiting to hear what she said. She closed the book, and she looked at me, and I said, what do you think? She said these words. I'm going to quote you verbatim. She said, Reggie,